They mocked the old cook polishing rails at dawn, coffee steam rising beside the flag's slow sway. Laughter skimmed the harbor like wind through tin, small and sharp. He just wiped the brass again, steady, while the others scoffed and turned away. Then an admiral's voice cut through the noise, "Ghost 5, stand down," and every smile on that dock fell quiet as the coin in his hand caught the morning sun. Quiet men leave echoes too, and some shine only when called by name. Morning drifted in slow and pale, the kind of light that made the harbor look older than time itself. The gulls were already awake, tracing lazy circles above the water, while a single man moved along the rail, his steps uneven, his back bent with memory instead of age. Henry Cole, the cook who never quite retired, polished the brass cleats one more time before the day's parade. His jacket hung loose at the shoulders, the color faded to a shade somewhere between navy and memory. "Hey, Grandpa, you miss a spot," one of the young sailors called out. The others laughed, short, harmless on the surface, but with that sharp edge people use when they don't know the story. Henry didn't answer. He just breathed through it, a steady rhythm like tide against hull. Evan Cole, standing a few yards away with a clipboard, felt the laughter pinch at him. He was the rookie in logistics assigned to dock prep, and the old cook happened to be his grandfather. He'd told no one. Not yet. "Guess he just likes pretending he's still Navy," another voice said. Metal clanked. Someone tossed a rag that missed and hit the rail. The men laughed again. Henry straightened, slow and deliberate. The rag slid down the railing into his bucket. He wiped his hands on his apron and almost absent-mindedly opened his palm. Inside lay a small, tarnished coin, edges worn smooth by years of carrying. The brass caught the dawn for half a second, a glimmer of gold among gray. Then he closed his hand around it. The laughter softened, unsure why. Maybe it was the way the gulls screamed overhead, or the way the old man stood there, not angry, not broken, just quiet. Evan stepped forward, voice low. "Morning, sir. Need a hand with that section." Henry looked at him, a faint smile tugging one corner of his mouth. "Morning'll do fine," he said. "Rails polish themselves if you give 'em time." One of the younger men snorted. "You sure he was ever in the service, Thum?" The words hung there, thin and cold. Evan's jaw tightened. He wanted to answer, but Henry's small shake of the head stopped him. "Let it be," Henry murmured. "Some storms blow over faster if you don't chase 'em." A long silence followed. Somewhere down the pier, a trumpet from the brass band rehearsal caught the wind, 3 uncertain notes, then a rising tune from the parade grounds. Henry dipped the rag again, slow circles like polishing away more than salt. The gulls wheeled lower now. The harbor smelled of diesel coffee and morning metal. Ropes creaked against bollards. A radio from the guard post hummed something nostalgic, half lost under static. Evan crouched beside him, pretending to check a bolt. He whispered, "You still keep that coin." Henry's gaze stayed on the water. "Some things keep you, son," he said. For a moment neither spoke. The laughter had faded completely. Even the younger sailors had turned away, uncertain what line they'd crossed. Henry leaned his elbow on the rail, looking out where the sun met the sea. But still he whispered barely loud enough for Evan to hear something about mornings like this makes the noise quiet down. The camera would have caught it, the small reflection in the coin between his fingers, the gulls sweeping behind him, the ropes swaying to the rhythm of tide. Then a freeze frame, his eyes calm, the harbor wind carrying the sound of a distant anthem. Still, something about him made the laughter fade. The rain came soft over Norfolk, the kind that never really fell, just drifted. By mid-morning, the post office smelled of wet envelopes and burnt coffee. Evan waited in line behind a row of sailors mailing parade posters, his clipboard damp, his thoughts louder than the drum practice echoing from across the square. He had followed a hunch. Something about the old man's coin and the way he'd closed his hand around it had stuck with him all night. When Henry finally stepped away from his locker to fetch supplies, Evan opened the dented metal door and found a single envelope resting on top of a folded apron. The paper was yellowed, the edges soft from years of being read and reread. Across the top in fading blue ink it said, "From Commander Voss, Norfolk Base Archives." Evan slid it into his folder, guilt nibbling at the edge of curiosity. Outside, the street smelled of roasted beans and sea mist. The little cafe next to the post office buzzed with voices, parade volunteers, a few retirees in caps, the morning talk show whispering through a dusty speaker. He ducked and ordered coffee and opened the letter. "Henry, your record shows you were part of Frost Vane. The Navy keeps certain names off the books. Call sign G5. Consider this closure." "Voss. Call sign G5, Evan murmured, tracing the letters. He didn't know what it meant, only that it felt heavier than it looked. The paper smelled faintly of oil and salt, like the dock itself. "Morning, kid." Evan looked up. Commander Voss, the same man who'd signed the note, stood by the counter, uniform pressed, voice sharp as a file. The man must have been in his late 60s, silver-rimmed glasses catching the fluorescent light. Commander Evan said quickly, folding the letter. Voss nodded toward the envelope. "That looks familiar." "You prying into base records now? Just found it in storage, sir." "Storage," Voss repeated, his mouth tightening. "Some men can't leave the past alone. Others retire before they earn it." The room went quiet. A woman stirring sugar slowed her spoon. Even the radio static hesitated. Evan blinked, not sure if it was an insult or a confession. Sir, I didn't mean..." "Don't mean anything." Voss cut in eyes cold. "Just do your duty." He paid for his coffee and left boots sharp against the tiles. Through the window, Evan saw him cross the street beneath the parade banners, red, white, and dripping rain. For a long time, Evan sat still, watching the steam curl from his cup, twisting like smoke from an unseen fire. Henry's name shimmered on the folded letter. When the bell over the door rang again, Henry stepped in, hat pulled low. He looked at the chair across from Evan. "That seat taken, no, sir." Henry sat, nodded toward the cup. "Coffee any good? Better than the company," Evan said, trying to smile. Henry chuckled softly, lines deepening around his eyes. "Guess that's most coffee in this town." They sat in companionable quiet. Outside, drums rolled from the parade field. Rain tapped the roof in time. Henry glanced at the letter but said nothing. "You still writing to the commander?" Evan asked finally. Henry's eyes followed the raindrops down the glass. "Not for years. Some mail never needed sending." Steam lifted between them like a curtain. For a heartbeat, the world held still, the drums, the rain, the hum of memory. Then Henry spoke again, low but steady. "You hear what he said about retiring?" "I did." Henry nodded. "Funny thing about service, son. It don't end when the paycheck stops." He stood, dropping a couple of crumpled bills beside the cup. "Don't chase ghosts too fast. They'll find you when they're ready." The bell chimed as he stepped back into the rain, parade drums swelling in the distance. Evan looked at the letter one last time, the ink bleeding slightly from his wet fingers. Still something about the words, "Call sign G5, refused to fade. The diner stayed open late during Fleet Week, the kind of place where the jukebox never stopped humming, even when the rain outside did. Yellow bulbs hung over chipped tables, and the air smelled of salt and burnt sugar. Henry sat in his usual booth by the window, the one that looked out over the harbor lights. Beside his coffee cup lay that same coin, now cleaned to a dull glow, catching the neon open sign every few seconds. Evan slid into the opposite seat, the night still clinging to his jacket. He hesitated before speaking. "I read the letter." Henry didn't look surprised. "Thought you might. You were call sign G5. Henry smiled, not proud, not shy, just remembering. "Once, long ago, we didn't call it that out loud. Some things were meant to stay between men and the sea." Evan leaned forward. "Commander Voss said you retired before you earned it." Henry chuckled, stirring his coffee. "Voss still counting medals, huh? Guess some folks measure honor by shine." He turned the coin over, tracing a small engraving, a 5-pointed star edges smooth from years of thumbprints. "This coin isn't from any ceremony," he said quietly. "We made 'em ourselves. Every man in Frost Vein carried one. When one went down, another held his coin till the tour was over. Kind of a promise." The jukebox crackled, then found a tune, the old Fleet Week anthem, half static, half nostalgia. Henry's voice blended into it. He aimed to keep his composure steady as the tide, he said softly, almost to himself. "That was our motto. G5 wasn't just a call sign, it was a way to stand when the storm didn't." Evan sat back, the letter heavy in his pocket. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Wouldn't change a thing," Henry replied. "Respect isn't medals, son. It's memory you don't advertise." From behind the counter, Lydia, the waitress who'd been there since the Reagan years, set down 2 plates of pie. "On the house," she said, wiping her hands. "Guess the coffee's stronger than rank today." Henry grinned. "That's so," she shrugged. "You two look like men solving world peace with caffeine." They laughed, soft and neighborly, the sound easing something tight in the air. For a moment, Evan forgot the letter, the teasing sailors, even Commander Voss's words. He just watched his grandfather take a slow bite of pie, the fork clinking gentle against the plate. "You ever miss it?" Evan asked. "The service," Henry wiped his mouth. "Every sunrise. But missing's just another way of staying loyal." Rain started again, tapping the windows in a steady rhythm. Outside, the harbor lights shimmered like small medals pinned to the water. Inside, silence settled, comfortable this time. Evan reached across the table, touching the edge of the coin. "It still matters," he said. Henry nodded. Then it did its job. The jukebox faded, leaving only the hum of the ceiling fan and the rain's soft applause. Henry lifted the coin one more time, holding it up to the diner's dim light. The reflection wavered on the window gold on glass like a small bridge between generations. Lydia returned with refills, her voice cutting the quiet. "Don't let that coffee get cold," she said. Henry smiled. "Wouldn't dare." The coin glinted once more beneath the jukebox light, steady, patient, and alive in its silence. Veterans Day dawned bright and brittle, the air sharp with brass polish and pride. Banners lined the boardwalk, flags cracked against the cold wind, and the harbor smelled of diesel and ceremony. Henry stood off to the side of the crowd, dressed in his cleanest jacket, the one Lydia had ironed twice and still called hopeless. Evan waited a few steps behind, clipboard in hand, again heart thudding with something heavier than duty. The band struck the opening notes of the anthem. Trumpets rose, cymbals caught the light, and the crowd turned toward the platform where Admiral Reeves was about to speak. A gust of wind rattled the microphone. Paper programs fluttered like white birds across the dock. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reeves began, "today. We honor the men and women who carried our colors through every sea and storm." His voice echoed off the water. Henry shifted his weight, his cane clicking once against the planks. Someone in the front whispered, "That's the old cook, isn't it?" He was slammed by protocol. Before the Admiral spoke, every glance, every rule, every rank, pressing him into the background. He didn't move. He simply reached into his pocket and turned the coin once between his fingers, the way some men breathe. Then from the podium, Reeves paused. His words caught mid-sentence. The Admiral leaned forward, squinting through the glare. The band faltered, brass hanging half-played in the wind. Then he heard a name he hadn't heard in decades. Ghost 5. Reeves's voice broke, then steadied. Stand down. The crowd went utterly still. No one clapped, no one coughed. Even the gulls seemed to stall in the air. Evan felt the moment stretch like tide pulling away from shore. He looked at his grandfather, at the man everyone had laughed at only days ago, standing there under the same sun as the Admiral. Henry didn't speak. He only nodded the smallest movement as Reeves stepped down from the stage. The Admiral approached slowly, Metal's gleaming eyes wide with recognition. He stopped a few feet away and raised a trembling hand to salute. "Sir," he said softly, "we thought Frost Vane was gone." Henry's voice came quiet, warm as the tide. "Some storms just go underground for a while." Reeves smiled, the kind of smile men carry for years before letting out. "Ghost 5, he said again, "welcome home." Then for the first time in a long time, Henry returned the salute. The crowd exhaled all at once. Somewhere a trumpet found its note again. The anthem picked up softly, swelling into the space between them. Evan's throat tightened as people around began to stand. One by one, hats came off, hands lifted. The laughter from days earlier felt impossibly far away, like it had belonged to a different town. Henry lowered his hand, the coin still gleaming in his palm. "Guess we both served longer than we planned," he said quietly. Reeves nodded. Service never really clocks out. Reporters scribbled. Cameras clicked. But the real moment wasn't on stage, it was the silence that followed that breath, where respect finally replaced noise. Sunlight struck the metals, scattering gold across the dock. Evan felt it on his face, warm and unreal. He looked at his grandfather, standing straighter now, hat against his chest. The same coin that had once been a private memory now shone in open air, its engraving catching every reflection. The emblem, a 5-pointed star, wrapped in the outline of wings, flashed once, then steadied, as if the squadron itself had come back to attention. A gust of wind lifted the flags. The band swelled again, and the harbor answered with a low echo from the ships. Reeves stepped back to the mic, voice rough. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "today, the dock remembers its quietest hero." Trumpets rose in sunlight. The salute held. The crowd bowed their heads. Evan didn't move, he just watched the light slide across the water, steady and sure. The ceremony lingered past its schedule, but no one left. The wind eased, and the harbor, once loud with brass and chatter, seemed to hold its breath. Admiral Reeves stood by the podium again, papers trembling slightly in his hand. Behind him, sailors lowered the flags to half-mast as sunlight caught the dock in warm amber tones. Commander Voss stepped out from the crowd. His uniform was immaculate, as always, but his eyes were different now, less glass, more water. He stopped in front of Henry, heels clicking against the wood. For a long time he said nothing. Then, with deliberate slowness, he raised his hand and saluted. "Mr. Hale," he said, voice low but clear, "I owe you more than words. You carried the honor the rest of us buried." Henry returned the salute, his expression unreadable. "Some weights get lighter when shared," he said quietly. Voss nodded, stepping aside as the Admiral turned toward the crowd. He unpinned a small bronze plaque covered by a navy cloth. This, Reeves announced, is for the unseen cooks and crews, the hands that kept the ships afloat while history forgot their names. He lifted the cloth. Beneath it, gleaming under the sunlight, was the emblem of the coin, 5 wings, and a star now etched in bronze and mounted to the dock rail. Below it, in raised letters, for those who served in silence, Ghost Squadron, Frost Vein, 1999. A hush spread over the harbor. Then one by one caps came off again. A few men wiped their eyes. Someone began to hum "Anchors Away," and within seconds the brass band picked up the melody, soft and proud. The music rolled across the water, bouncing off the hulls of old ships and new. Evan stood near the back, watching his grandfather's shoulders relax for the first time since he could remember. It wasn't triumph, it was release. Henry stepped closer to the plaque cane, tapping gently against the boards. He reached out, resting his palm on the cool metal. His reflection shimmered in the bronze, half ghost, half man. Beside it, the old coin had been framed beneath glass, secured forever under a single beam of late sunlight. It caught the light and sent it back toward the sea. Lydia appeared beside Evan, wiping her hands on her apron. "Guess he finally got a table with a view," she said softly. Evan smiled. He earned it. The brass faded to quiet hums, just the sound of seagulls and gentle clapping now. Admiral Reeves lowered his hat and spoke for all of them. "Let this harbor remember what the records forgot." No one moved for a moment after that. The air felt cleaner somehow, the kind of stillness that doesn't demand applause. Henry turned, leaning on his cane. He looked out at the water blue streaked with red and white reflections from the flags rippling above. For the first time in years, his hand didn't tremble. Then he smiled for the first time. The harbor was quiet again, weeks after the ceremony. Winter sunlight spilled through the blinds of the small community radio booth, where Evan now spent his mornings. The sign outside read, "Voices of the Harbor. Stories worth keeping." The walls still smelled faintly of salt and coffee, and on the desk sat a framed photograph of Henry smiling beside Admiral Reeves, the plaque gleaming behind them. Next to it lay the coin, its edges dulled from years of being carried yet still catching light, as if the sea lived inside it. Evan adjusted the microphone. "Good evening, Norfolk," he said softly. "This week's story is about the quiet men who built the noise we call freedom." He paused, glancing at the coin. "Some of you might remember the ceremony on the dock last month," he continued, voice low, steady like his grandfather's. "Today's broadcast is dedicated to one of them, a man who once served as the ship's cook, but carried more truth than any file ever could." He turned a page of notes, though he hardly needed them. When folks teased him, he smiled and kept scrubbing the rails. When the Admiral called him by his name, he just nodded and stood tall. Because that's what real service looks like. It doesn't demand an audience. It just endures. Behind the glass, Lydia waved from the control room, holding a cup of coffee with G5 written in marker across the lid. Evan smiled. He could almost hear Henry's voice again, rough but warm. "Respect isn't medals, son. It's memory you don't advertise." He leaned closer to the mic. The plaque down by the harbor reads, "For those who served in silence." But this morning we remember him differently. Today we call him by his name again. For a heartbeat, the studio was silent. Then the faint sound of the sea rolled through the speakers recorded from that very dock. Trumpets faded in slow and reverent. Each note on the air was a quiet shot of honor not fired, but remembered. He watched the sunlight drift across the desk, touching the coin. Its reflection shimmered on the control board, merging with the glow of the recording light. Evan reached over, straightened the photo, and whispered, "You made it home, old man." The music swelled softly. Anchors, Away played by the local high school band, imperfect but proud. Out in town, shopkeepers tuned their radios low. At the diner, Lydia turned up the volume. Even Commander Voss, sitting by the window with a folded newspaper, listened without a word. Across the harbor, flags moved gently in the wind, like the tide itself was keeping rhythm. Evan's voice returned quiet and sure. "If this story moved you," he said, "share it forward." The last sound was the soft clink of the coin as it settled beside the microphone. Then the feed faded, coin close up. Sea horizon. Silence. The dock was quiet at dusk, just the low hum of the radio drifting from the diner window. Evan's voice carried across the harbor, telling again how one old cook turned a jeer into a salute, while sunlight traced the plaque that still glowed gold by the rail. "Still, kindness lingers longer than applause," he said, as gulls wheeled above and coffee cups clinked below, small sounds of a town learning to listen. Like a lamp in a winter window, his story stayed lit, for anyone searching the water for proof that decency outlasts rank, each retelling a tide returning home. Then the camera found the coin beside the mic, steady in the light, and his final words settled soft as tide foam. "Today we call him by his name again."